It happened without warning. Just after dawn, blacked-out vehicles swept through the gates of Clarence House as palace staff were abruptly cleared from entire corridors. Minutes later, Prince William arrived alone without Catherine, without aides, and without a single public explanation. By midday, royal correspondents were whispering about an urgent internal matter involving King Charles himself. But what truly alarmed insiders was not the meeting, it was who was deliberately excluded from it. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. For years, the British monarchy has mastered the art of silence. Crisis after crisis has been buried beneath carefully staged appearances, polished smiles, and official statements so vague they reveal almost nothing at all. But according to palace insiders, what unfolded behind the walls of Clarence House that morning felt very different. Staff members reportedly received instructions with unusual urgency. Entire hallways were sealed off, phones were restricted. Even senior aides, individuals who had served the crown for decades, were allegedly asked to sign fresh confidentiality notices before entering specific areas of the residence. That alone was enough to send shockwaves through royal circles. Because within the monarchy, secrecy is routine, but panic is not. Then came the detail that truly fueled speculation. Reports suggest Queen Camilla was nowhere near the critical discussions taking place that morning. Various interpretations of the situation describe her absence differently. Some royal commentators claimed she had prior engagements. Others whispered something far more explosive, that this meeting was intentionally structured without her involvement. And inside an institution built entirely on hierarchy, symbolism, and access, exclusion can speak louder than any public announcement ever could. Outside the palace walls, helicopters were reportedly seen moving unusually early across central London, while security around Clarence House quietly intensified. Royal photographers stationed nearby described an atmosphere that felt icy and deeply tense. Prince William's arrival only intensified the mystery. Witnesses claimed the future king stepped from his vehicle carrying several official red folders, his expression grim and unusually witty. There were no greetings for cameras, no acknowledgement of reporters, no carefully rehearsed royal composure, just silence, heavy, deliberate silence. By early afternoon, the palace released a short public statement attempting to calm speculation. But instead of reassuring the public, it only deepened concern. The wording was strangely careful. It offered no direct explanation for the gathering, no clarification about Charles's condition, and no indication of what had required such immediate attention. Veteran royal correspondents from publications like The Times and Palace Insiders, familiar with royal crisis management, immediately noticed the difference in tone. This was not the language of routine planning. This sounded like containment. And according to several well-connected royal observers, tensions had already been quietly building for weeks behind closed doors. Reports suggest senior members of the household had grown increasingly concerned about Charles's workload, his physical exhaustion, and the growing strain placed on Prince William as public pressure mounted around the future of the monarchy. Some insiders even claimed private disagreements inside the royal house. Had reached a breaking point long before this emergency meeting ever took place. But until now, those whispers had remained buried beneath royal protocol and public appearances carefully designed to project stability. What nobody realized then was that this gathering would become the beginning of something much larger. Because the real shock came hours later, when whispers emerged that the meeting centered on a decision Charles could no longer postpone. For months, the palace insisted the king remained firmly in control, yet behind closed doors, reports suggest something far more troubling was unfolding. Those closest to the monarch allegedly noticed moments of exhaustion, missed briefings, and increasingly shortened engagements. Now insiders claim the meeting with William may have been the moment Charles finally confronted a devastating royal reality. What made the situation so unsettling was not simply the king's health itself, but the growing sense that the institution around him had quietly begun preparing for something far more serious than the public understood. Since early 2024, Buckingham Palace had worked relentlessly to project calm. Public appearances continued. My really staged photographs reassured the nation. Official updates remained measured and optimistic. But according to individuals familiar with palace operations, an entirely different atmosphere had allegedly taken hold behind the scenes, one marked by contingency meetings, altered schedules, and increasingly urgent conversations about the future of the crown. Reports suggest aides had gradually started restructuring Charles's workload months before the public noticed anything unusual. Engagements were shortened without explanation. Travel plans were quietly revised. Certain meetings once handled personally by the king were allegedly redirected toward Prince William with growing frequency. At first, royal insiders described these adjustments as temporary precautions, but over time, the pattern became impossible to ignore. The future king was no longer simply supporting the monarch. He was, according to palace whispers, slowly being prepared to carry far greater constitutional responsibility than anyone had anticipated this early in Charles's reign. That reality reportedly weighed heavily on William himself. Sources close to royal administrative circles claim the Prince of Wales had come increasingly involved in sensitive state matters usually reserved for the sovereign. Private briefings intensified. Constitutional advisors were seen entering royal residences with unusual regularity. Even long-serving courtiers allegedly began referring to internal discussions using a phrase that immediately alarmed veteran palace observers. Continuity planning. Within the monarchy, those words carry enormous weight. They are not used casually. They signal preparation, transition, and perhaps most chilling of all, inevitability. Meanwhile, reports suggest private medical consultations surrounding Charles intensified significantly in recent weeks. Palace vehicles were allegedly seen making discreet late-night visits connected to royal healthcare advisors, while insiders whispered about increasingly cautious recommendations from physicians. No official source confirmed the extent of those concerns, but according to several royal commentators, the atmosphere inside the institution had begun to resemble the final transitional period surrounding Queen Elizabeth II during her final months. Not publicly, of course. The palace would never allow that comparison openly. Yet behind closed doors, the emotional parallels reportedly became impossible for senior staff to ignore. And perhaps that was the most painful truth of all. Because Charles had waited his entire life for the crown. Decades spent preparing. Decades spent standing in the shadow of a monarch who seemed eternal. Yet just as he finally ascended the throne, insiders now claim he found himself facing the terrifying possibility that time was moving far faster than anyone had imagined. Those closest to him allegedly noticed moments where the emotional burden became visible, brief flashes of frustration, exhaustion, even quiet reflection during private discussions about the monarchy's future. Senior courtiers, meanwhile, reportedly feared something even larger than the king's condition itself. Their concerns centered on stability. The monarchy survives on continuity, certainty, and the illusion of permanence. But behind the ancient walls of the royal institution, whispers of uncertainty had allegedly begun spreading through every level of the household. And as Charles wrestled with the future of the crown, another deeply personal conflict was reportedly erupting inside the royal household itself. Behind the polished smiles and balcony appearances, palace insiders whisper of a Cold War years in the making. Prince William and Queen Camilla, once careful allies of necessity, are now rumored to be locked in a quiet but brutal struggle over influence, access, and the future direction of the monarchy itself. To the public, the royal family continued to project unity. Carefully timed appearances, restrained smiles, and coordinated statements created the impression of stability during one of the most difficult periods of King Charles's reign. But according to reports emerging from inside palace circles, the atmosphere behind closed doors had become increasingly tense, divided by rival advisors, competing loyalties, and an escalating battle over who truly held influence around the king while his health remained under intense scrutiny. At the center of the tension, insiders claim, was a growing clash between Prince William's camp and the advisors surrounding Queen Camilla. For years, both sides reportedly maintained an uneasy balance. William understood the importance of presenting a united monarchy, while Camilla's allies allegedly worked carefully to preserve her position and authority. Beside Charles. But as the king's condition became a greater concern behind the scenes, that balance reportedly began to fracture. Because in moments of royal uncertainty, access becomes power, and power inside the monarchy is rarely surrendered quietly. Reports suggest one of the biggest points of conflict involved control over Charles's daily schedule, private communications, and internal decision-making. Sources familiar with palace operations claim William's advisors pushed for tighter oversight surrounding the king's workload and long-term planning. Meanwhile, individuals connected to Camilla's circle allegedly resisted what they viewed as an aggressive expansion of William's authority before the transition of power had formally arrived. The result, according to several royal commentators, was the emergence of what insiders quietly described as competing courts operating inside the same institution. One side reportedly represented the future of the monarchy, William, Catherine, and a younger generation focused on protecting the crown's long-term stability. The other, critics claimed, reflected remnants of the old guard surrounding Charles and Camilla, determined to preserve existing influence while the king remained on the throne. And while neither side publicly acknowledged any divide, whispers inside royal administrative circles allegedly grew impossible to contain. The tension became especially intense around public image management during Charles's illness. Reports suggest disagreements emerged over how much transparency the palace should offer regarding the king's health and who should increasingly step forward to reassure the public. Some insiders claimed William's camp believed the monarchy needed visible stability centered around the Wales family, particularly as Catherine herself recovered from a deeply difficult personal period. Others allegedly feared shifting too much public attention toward William too quickly would create the appearance of an unofficial transfer of authority while Charles was still reigning monarch. Caught in the middle of it all was the king himself. Sources suggest Charles remained emotionally torn between loyalty to Camilla and his growing reliance on William as the future of the institution. And according to royal observers, that emotional divide created an atmosphere of quiet mistrust throughout parts of the palace. Every decision reportedly carried deeper implications. Every meeting raised new suspicions. Even routine scheduling changes allegedly became political battlegrounds, interpreted as victories or defeats by rival factions behind closed doors. For William, however, the stakes were becoming deeply personal. Insiders claim his greatest concern was not palace rivalry alone, but shielding Catherine, Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis from the kind of internal chaos that has haunted generations of royals before them. Reports suggest he became increasingly determined to create a tighter, more controlled inner circle around his family as tensions inside the monarchy intensified. But while courtiers focused on palace politics, a far more explosive concern was reportedly raised during the meeting itself. Witnesses say William emerged from the private audience looking pale, unusually silent, and emotionally drained. One palace source described the atmosphere as heavier than anything seen since the Queen's final months. Whatever Charles revealed behind those doors, insiders insist it changed the tone of the monarchy overnight. For years, Prince William had prepared himself for my duty. That reality had been woven into his life since childhood. Every royal tour, every public appearance, every carefully controlled step beside the crown had been shaping him for the future that one day awaited him. But according to palace insiders, nothing could have prepared him for the emotional weight of the conversation that unfolded inside Clarence House that morning. Because this was no longer about distant succession or abstract constitutional planning. Reports suggest Charles spoke with a level of honesty and urgency that forced William to confront the possibility that the monarchy's future might arrive far sooner than anyone had expected. Sources familiar with royal discussions claim the king allegedly raised deeply sensitive questions surrounding continuity, long-term stability, and the responsibilities William may soon need to assume on a far greater scale. Those close to the palace described the discussion as emotionally devastating, not because Charles formally surrendered authority, but because for the first time, father and son were reportedly forced to acknowledge the fragile reality surrounding the crown itself. The institution built on permanence suddenly felt frighteningly vulnerable. Insiders whisper that Charles spoke not only as monarch, but as a father burdened by the knowledge that time may no longer be fully on his side. That emotional shift reportedly stunned William more than any constitutional conversation could. Because beneath the centuries of royal tradition and rigid protocol, there remained a deeply human reality few outside palace walls ever truly consider. The king was speaking to the son who may soon inherit not only the throne, but the crushing emotional burden attached to it. And according to several royal commentators, William's greatest concern during those discussions was not himself, it was his family. Reports suggest he became intensely focused on protecting Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis from the relentless pressures that have consumed previous generations of royals. Palace insiders claim the Prince of Wales has grown increasingly determined to shield his children from instability, public trauma, and the emotional fractures that have haunted the House of Windsor for decades. In many ways, sources say William fears history repeating itself. That fear reportedly explains why Catherine's role, behind the scenes, has become more important than ever. While she remained absent from the emergency meeting itself, insiders insist the Princess of Wales has quietly become William's emotional anchor throughout the growing crisis. Reports suggest Catherine encouraged restraint, stability, and unity even as tensions inside the monarchy intensified. Her calm influence, according to those familiar with royal operations, has helped William navigate some of the most emotionally difficult conversations of his life, while balancing public duty with private anxiety surrounding both his father and his own family's future. Throughout the discussions, several palace figures allegedly referenced the late Queen Elizabeth II and the guidance she once offered during periods of constitutional uncertainty. Her approach to duty, silence, and institutional stability reportedly remains a powerful influence over William's thinking today. Insiders claim he increasingly views her final years as a blueprint for how the monarchy survives moments of vulnerability without allowing panic to consume the institution. But despite those efforts, the emotional atmosphere inside the palace reportedly continued to darken. Staff members allegedly described corridors filled with tension, whispered conversations abruptly ending when senior figures approached, and an overwhelming sense of uncertainty spreading through royal households already strained by months of concern. Some insiders even claimed morale among longtime courtiers had quietly deteriorated as fears surrounding the monarchy's future became harder to dismiss. Yet the deeper William looked into the situation, the clearer it became that this wasn't only about health, it was about survival of the institution itself. The British monarchy has survived abdications, scandals, wars, and betrayal. But insiders now fear the institution faces something far more dangerous. Instability at the very top during one of the most fragile transitional periods in modern royal history. For centuries, the crown has depended on one powerful illusion above all else, the belief that it endures no matter who occupies the throne. Governments collapse, prime ministers disappear. Public opinion rises and falls like tides. Yet the monarchy survives because it projects continuity, permanence, and order. But according to growing whispers inside palace walls, that my fully protected image has begun to show signs of strain unlike anything seen in decades. And for the first time since the final years of Queen Elizabeth II, public anxiety surrounding the future of the institution is reportedly becoming impossible for royal advisors to fully contain. Reports suggest concern among the British public has quietly intensified in recent months as questions surrounding King Charles's health continue to circulate. Every shortened appearance, every cancelled engagement, every carefully worded palace statement has only deepened speculation about what may truly be happening behind closed doors. Royal commentators claim the monarchy now faces a dangerous balancing act attempting to reassure the nation while simultaneously preparing for possibilities too serious to openly discuss. And within that uncertainty, attention has increasingly shifted toward one man, Prince William. According to palace insiders, William is no longer viewed simply as the future king. He is increasingly being seen as the stabilizing force holding the monarchy together during a period of emotional and constitutional turbulence. Sources close to royal operations claim senior figures inside the institution have quietly begun relying on the Prince of Wales to project calm, continuity, and discipline while concerns surrounding Charles continue to grow behind the scenes. But with that rising role comes enormous pressure not only on William himself, but on the entire Wales family. Because the monarchy's image, perhaps more than ever before, now appears deeply tied to William and Catherine. Their public appearances reportedly carry heightened significance. Their family dynamic has become symbolic of stability at a time when the institution desperately needs reassurance. Royal insiders claim palace strategists increasingly understand that public trust in the monarchy's future rests heavily on the image of a united, disciplined next generation capable of carrying the crown through uncertain years ahead. That reality has reportedly created fierce internal debate inside royal circles. Some advisors allegedly believe the monarchy must modernize more aggressively under William's eventual reign in order to survive changing public expectations. Others fear moving too quickly away from tradition could fracture the very foundations that have protected the institution for generations. According to several royal commentators, this growing divide has created a quiet ideological struggle within palace walls, one centered on what the monarchy should become once the transition finally arrives. And history hangs heavily over every discussion. Insiders reportedly draw uncomfortable comparisons to previous succession crises that shook the crown during moments of vulnerability. From the abdication turmoil of King Edward VIII to the emotional instability surrounding Princess Diana's death, palace veterans allegedly fear how quickly public confidence can collapse when uncertainty takes hold at the top of the institution. That fear explains why Charles, despite mounting personal pressure, reportedly remains deeply determined to preserve stability at all costs. Sources claim the king has become increasingly focused on protecting the monarchy from visible disorder, even as emotional strain and internal tensions intensify behind closed doors. Those closest to him allegedly describe a monarch torn between physical exhaustion and an unwavering sense of duty to safeguard the crown until the very last possible moment. But what few people realized at the time was that Charles may already have begun preparing for something much larger than the public understood. And then came the moment that truly stunned royal insiders, a decision Charles reportedly made before the meeting even began. Long before William arrived at Clarence House, a sealed red dispatch box had reportedly been placed beside the king's private desk. To outsiders, it looked routine, but palace veterans allegedly understood immediately. This was not ceremonial paperwork. It was preparation for a constitutional contingency few believed would arrive so soon. Inside the British monarchy, certain symbols carry enormous weight, none more so than the red boxes that travel daily between the sovereign and the machinery of government. For decades, they have represented continuity, authority, and control, the quiet ritual through which the crown remains connected to the state itself. But according to insiders familiar with royal procedure, the dispatch box waiting for Charles that morning reportedly contained documents far more sensitive than ordinary state business. Various interpretations suggest the contents centered on constitutional planning, emergency continuity arrangements, and discussions surrounding how royal duties could be redistributed should the king's condition worsen unexpectedly. That possibility alone reportedly sent waves of anxiety through parts of the palace. Because while contingency planning exists within every monarchy, insiders claim the urgency surrounding these discussions felt unusually intense. Sources suggest senior legal advisors, constitutional experts, and longtime royal administrators had quietly been consulted in recent weeks as concerns surrounding Charles deepened behind closed doors. Some palace figures allegedly believed the institution could no longer afford informal conversations about future possibilities. Formal structures, they argued, now needed to be examined with alarming seriousness. Reports claim William was presented with confidential briefing documents outlining constitutional procedures tied to royal incapacity, delegation of duties, and emergency transitions. Nothing publicly dramatic, no abdication, no immediate transfer of power. But according to individuals familiar with royal operations, the very existence of those discussions marked a deeply emotional turning point within the monarchy. Because for years, the idea of William ascending more rapidly into the center of royal authority remained theoretical. Suddenly, insiders whisper, it no longer felt theoretical at all. Several royal commentators later pointed to chilling historical parallels. During the final years of Queen Elizabeth II, palace officials reportedly carried out similar behind-the-scenes continuity preparations while maintaining absolute public calm. Yet according to insiders, even veteran staff members who lived through that transition were unsettled by the procedural urgency now unfolding around Charles. Some allegedly described an atmosphere where every administrative movement suddenly felt loaded with deeper meaning. Every revised briefing, every altered schedule, every private legal consultation quietly reinforced the same terrifying possibility, that the monarchy might soon face another historic transition far sooner than expected. And at the center of it all stood William, increasingly forced to confront the burden of kingship not as a distant future, but as an approaching reality. Reports suggest the emotional pressure surrounding those confidential conversations affected him deeply. Because inheriting the crown is not merely ceremonial. It means inheriting centuries of expectation, scrutiny, and responsibility during one of the most unstable periods the monarchy has faced in generations. Insiders claim William understood that every decision made now would shape not only his own reign, but the future his children would eventually inherit as well. Meanwhile, palace staff reportedly grew alarmed by how quickly internal procedures appeared to accelerate. Sources whisper that conversations once spread across months were suddenly condensed into days. Senior aides allegedly operated with unusual caution, avoiding written communication whenever possible and restricting sensitive discussions to tightly controlled meetings. Even longtime courtiers reportedly sensed the institution entering unfamiliar territory where preparation itself became a source of fear. Yet despite the secrecy, the monarchy's greatest challenge remained impossible to fully control: perception. Because while the machinery of royal continuity moved quietly behind palace walls, rumors outside those walls continued growing louder with every passing hour. And according to insiders, one final revelation was about to push private anxiety dangerously, while close to public crisis. But even as the machinery of monarchy moved quietly behind closed doors, one final revelation threatened to turn private concern into public crisis. By evening, the whispers had escaped palace walls. Royal reporters, broadcasters, and veteran correspondents suddenly began using the same chilling language. Serious discussions, urgent planning, and deep concern at the highest level. The palace tried to contain the speculation. It failed. What began as isolated murmurs inside royal circles rapidly transformed into a media storm moving faster than palace officials could control. By late afternoon, journalists connected to the monarchy reportedly noticed an unusual shift in the tone of off-record briefings coming from sources close to the institution. Conversations once dismissed as routine concerns surrounding the king's health suddenly carried a sharper edge. Royal correspondents who had spent decades navigating palace secrecy allegedly sensed the same thing at once: that something significant had changed behind closed doors, and the carefully protected balance surrounding the monarchy was beginning to crack. According to media insiders, palace officials immediately launched what appeared to be a coordinated damage control effort. Senior communications aides reportedly contacted multiple royal reporters urging restraint and discouraging unnecessary speculation. But instead of calming the situation, those efforts only intensified suspicion. Because within the world of royal journalism, silence itself often becomes the loudest warning sign of all. The more carefully the palace tried to contain the narrative, the more aggressively questions began spreading through television studios, newspaper offices, and online discussions across Britain. The official statement released earlier that day quickly came under intense scrutiny. Critics described the wording as unusually vague, emotionally detached, and strategically evasive. Royal analysts questioned why such an extraordinary meeting between the king and Prince William had taken place with virtually no meaningful explanation offered afterward. Others pointed to the timing of the statement itself, noting how rapidly it had been prepared despite the alleged urgency of the discussions behind palace walls. To many observers, it no longer sounded like reassurance. It sounded like management. Then social media erupted. Within hours, succession rumors flooded online platforms as speculation surrounding Charles's condition spiraled beyond the palace's control. Some claimed preparations for a future transition were already underway. Others pointed to William's increasingly visible constitutional role over recent months as evidence that internal planning had quietly accelerated long before the public realized. Hashtags connected to the royal family surged across the internet, while clips of Charles's recent pawn by frame by commentators searching for signs of deeper concern. Meanwhile, veteran royal correspondents began hinting at something even more troubling: possible instability inside the institution itself. Without making direct accusations, several commentators subtly referenced divisions behind palace walls, unusual procedural movements, and rising anxiety among senior staff. The comparisons to previous royal crises became impossible to ignore. Observers recalled the secrecy surrounding the final months of Queen Elizabeth II, while others drew uncomfortable parallels to moments in royal history where public calm masked profound internal uncertainty. And with every comparison, public concern only deepened further. According to insiders, Prince William reportedly grew increasingly frustrated as leaks and speculation continued spreading throughout the evening. Sources suggest he viewed the uncontrolled rumors as dangerous not only for the monarchy's image, but for his father personally. Those close to the prince allegedly claim he feared the institution was approaching a tipping point where public panic could begin overtaking official messaging entirely. Yet despite the growing chaos, Charles reportedly remained determined to avoid any appearance of crisis. Palace figures claim the king insisted the monarchy must continue projecting stability no matter how intense private concerns became behind closed doors. But by then, the atmosphere across Britain had already changed. The certainty surrounding the crown suddenly felt fragile in a way many had never experienced before. Questions once whispered cautiously in private were now being discussed openly across the country. And as Britain absorbed the growing uncertainty surrounding its monarch, William quietly prepared for the reality that may soon define his entire life. As the gates of Clarence House finally closed that night, one truth appeared impossible to ignore. The era of transition had already begun. Not publicly, not officially, but inside the ancient machinery of the monarchy, Prince William was no longer being prepared simply as the future king. Reports suggest he was being prepared for something much sooner. For generations, the British monarchy has survived because it understands one brutal reality better than any institution on earth: time never pauses for the crown. Monarchs age, dynasties shift, and eventually every heir must step forward whether they feel ready or not. According to palace insiders, that realization now hangs heavily over Prince William as the pressure surrounding King Charles continues quietly intensifying behind closed doors. The carefully controlled balance between present and future reportedly no longer feels stable. Instead, it feels like a monarchy standing on the edge of an unavoidable turning point. Sources suggest William has already begun embracing responsibilities that extend far beyond the traditional role of heir apparent. Constitutional briefings reportedly arrive with increasing frequency. Senior advisor, it is allegedly consult him on matters once handled exclusively by the sovereign himself. And while the palace continues projecting calm publicly, insiders claim preparations for a more accelerated transition have quietly become part of daily royal operations. Yet those closest to William insist the emotional burden behind that shift remains enormous. Because unlike public perception, the road to kingship is not triumphal inside palace walls. It is isolating, exhausting, and filled with the quiet understanding that duty often demands sacrifice long before glory ever arrives. At the center of that fragile transition stands Catherine, Princess of Wales. According to royal commentators, her role inside the monarchy has evolved dramatically during this period of uncertainty. Once viewed primarily as the poised and disciplined future queen beside William, insiders now describe her as one of the institution's most stabilizing forces. Sources claim palace officials increasingly recognize the emotional reassurance Catherine provides not only to William personally, but to the monarchy's public image itself. Her calm composure during periods of mounting speculation has reportedly become essential, a mile to maintaining confidence in the future of the crown. And then there are the children: Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis, three young royals growing up beneath the immense weight of history while unknowingly becoming symbols of continuity for an anxious nation. Insiders whisper that William's deepest determination revolves around protecting they from the emotional fractures that scarred earlier generations of the royal family. Every decision, every strategic discussion, every effort to preserve stability reportedly carries the same underlying purpose: ensuring the next generation inherits a monarchy strong enough to survive the storms already gathering around it. Meanwhile, reports suggest King Charles remains fiercely committed to preserving the dignity of the institution, no matter how difficult the private reality becomes. Those close to the monarch claim he understands the monarchy must appear steady even during moments of deep internal uncertainty. That sense of duty, forged through decades spent preparing for the throne, allegedly drives every decision still being made behind palace walls. And according to several insiders, Charles remains deeply aware that Maestri will ultimately judge not only how he ruled, but how successfully he protected the crown during one of its most fragile transitions in modern times. Inside royal circles, whispers of a new royal era have reportedly begun growing louder. Not an official transition, not yet, but a gradual shift already reshaping the future direction of the monarchy itself, and hovering over every decision, every private conversation, and every carefully managed public appearance is the enduring legacy of Queen Elizabeth II, the monarch, whose discipline, restraint, and unwavering devotion to duty still guide the institution she left behind. Because within the House of Windsor, the crown has never waited for certainty, it only waits for the next heir strong enough to carry its weight. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.